This is episode 11 of the Relentless Man podcast. Discipline. Welcome to the Relentless Man podcast. I am your host, Christian Mojaiso. My goal is to help men die empty. To make sure that you die having used up every ounce of potential that is trapped within you. However, to help you die empty, I will have to be very raw and brutally honest with you. So if you're easily offended, stop listening. If you're easily triggered, stop listening. If you can't handle explicit language, stop listening. If you are fragile, stop listening. Otherwise, let's dig in. Alright, so welcome back to this episode. I'm with my friend Collin Blinder and we're having a conversation about discipline today.
It's great to be here. We're talking about a really fun topic, discipline. I'm excited.
Me too.
All right. So just define discipline.
So I'd think of discipline as every time you have a standard that you uphold, we say that you're disciplined. And the standard that you're upholding is called a discipline. So for instance, if you decide, I'm going to wake up in the morning at 8 a.m. So 8 a.m. becomes the standard. And if you uphold that standard by actually waking up at 8 a.m., then we say you're a disciplined person. The moment you break it, you stop being disciplined. So if you wake up at 8:01, it's no longer a standard and you stop being disciplined.
Okay. So a discipline essentially means that you have to set rules for yourself. Or others could set rules for you, right?
That's right.
Okay, cool.
You've actually touched on an important concept there because there are really two types of discipline. And there could be a mixture of them, but there are two main types. There's external discipline and internal discipline. Internal discipline is when you set your own standards and you uphold them. So if you decide for yourself at 5 p.m. I'm going to go to the gym and work to the best of my ability for an hour. No one told you to set that standard. You set that standard for yourself and you uphold it. Then that is discipline that is internal. That's what we call internal discipline. External discipline would be when society imposes a standard on you. So, for instance, if you live in North America, then, for instance, there's a standard about not peeing in public parks. So, that would be an example of a standard of behavior that society has placed on you.
Okay.
And you uphold it because there are consequences.
So this is interesting because there's personal discipline and then there's external discipline.
Right.
And so discipline can be positive and negative. So what are the benefits of discipline? Because I would say that if you have someone who's hitting you every time you sit down and that's their way of disciplining you, that's not good discipline. So what are some benefits of discipline? And are there benefits of both personally imposed discipline and externally imposed discipline? Or do most of the benefits come from personal discipline?
So with this question, it's you want to figure out what situation you find yourself in. So for instance, usually the standards of the society, external discipline, might be enough for you to be an average person. Typically, the standards are enough for you to function, but just to be average, not really to be extraordinary, not really to die empty. So for instance, your boss is going to be okay and not fire you if you do a job that is good enough. Just not below standard. If it's good enough, the boss is perfectly fine. So that would be the standard that your boss has set for you. But that standard of doing an average job is not going to help you maximize your potential. So usually, if you look at people's expectations and their standards of you, they're usually the standards that are average, that are going to help you just be a normal person. But if you're listening to this podcast and you want to die empty, then you're not interested in being normal. You want to be extraordinary, to do extraordinary things. What this means is that you want to make sure that you set your own standards that you uphold, your own discipline, because then you can set the high standard. Just because the professor says getting a 50% on the test is acceptable, that's a pass. That's his own standard. Good enough. But if you want to be, let's say, exceptional at the course, then you're not going to set your standard at 50. Yours might be 90. That is your standard, and that's the standard you're upholding, because it's in line with your goals of maximizing your potential. However, there are certain external conditions, certain communities that place a high standard on you anyway. So, for instance, think about a group like the Navy SEALs. Their standards are really rigorous, really high standards of behavior, execution. They want you to do your absolute best. They're always pushing you to the limit to endure more. If you're in that sort of environment, then it might be possible for you to just follow the external standards placed on you by the community, and just upholding those standards will enable you to accomplish a goal of dying empty and maximizing your potential. But such communities are rare. As a rule of thumb, people's expectations and society's expectations are not the sort of expectations that are going to make you extraordinary, that are going to make you achieve massive goals. So it's important, even if you're like a Navy SEAL, it's still important to have your own standards that are above the standards of Navy SEALs. Go become like a super Navy SEAL. If we're talking about maximizing your potential, then you want to be more than what society expects from you. Your standards kind of always being higher than what society expects.
So, last week you and I were hanging out and we were drinking some beers, and I was asking you a lot about discipline and about how to have a disciplined life practice. And you said, you were talking, I think, about Jocko Willink, the SEAL.
Navy SEAL, host of the Jocko podcast. And you said that essentially he has a philosophy where if you don't do something, you failed. If something doesn't happen for you or it doesn't happen the right way, you always have to take it as failure. And I was talking to you about things that I wanted in my life, like to wake up earlier, get more done. And you said that a benefit of that thinking is you don't cut yourself slack, but that you can introduce sort of like a growth mindset to it. You say, I messed up today, but tomorrow I won't. And so you don't have to say, I messed up today, I'm done. So it's kind of interesting because it's a hard ass way of thinking, but it still allows for a growth mindset and a normal person. So I've tried this week to implement that and wake up early. I woke up at 6:20 on Monday. I woke up at 6 on Tuesday. I woke up at 6:30 on Wednesday. Today I woke up at 7:20. So I've got a bad curve going. Tomorrow I'll probably wake up at 8, so I'm messing up. So I'm not a disciplined person per se. Can you give me an example of a discipline in your life that you're proud of? And just what makes that discipline rather than routine, why you're proud of it, and what it allows you to do. Okay, so before we get to that question, let's go back a bit to Jocko Willink and his idea. So the principle he talks about is extreme ownership. So basically his idea is that if you want to be a successful person, if you want to be the sort of person that makes things happen, then you can't afford to blame anyone else or anything in society for how your life turns out, or for the circumstances in your life. And as far as this is concerned, you should take the attitude of everything is my fault. So you take complete responsibility. You own everything that happens to you. So for instance, if let's say you're a teacher in a school and your students come late, a typical teacher will say, these kids come late, and blame the kids. Someone with extreme ownership, like Jocko Willink, would say, what am I doing? First he'll say, it's completely my fault. I am responsible for everything that happens in my class. If my students come late to class, it's my fault because I didn't communicate well enough, or I didn't make it important enough that they come early. So that's the extreme mindset ownership. So extreme ownership mindset. Obviously, really powerful stuff, because what it does is that once you hold yourself accountable for everything that happens in your life, then it means that you're able to suddenly things are under your control. If students coming late is your fault, it means that if you had done something else, they wouldn't have come late. So it empowers you. That's the power of the extreme mindset ownership. You take a completely horrible situation, something like the rain. Someone puts it really well on the host of London Real, I think Brian Rose. He talks about how if it rains, it's my fault, is the idea, because I know I should have done something to stop it. Right? That's extreme ownership right there. You don't even blame the weather for being the weather. It's all your fault. Everything is always under your control. This is very empowering mindset. Obviously, I don't subscribe to it. I have my own version of it. Something I talked about before in an episode. And the idea is having an active mindset instead. What I mean by that is, it's all well and good to think that everything is your fault, but it's really not in touch with reality. Because if let's say I'm a teacher and my students come late, I could say that it's my fault that the students came late, but in reality there are a lot of factors involved. There is my decisions, okay, I have part of the blame. Then there's the students, because they have also wills. They could have come early, but they did not. So in a sense, they're also responsible for coming late. Then there is the families from which they come. Maybe their parents didn't drive them on time. So the parents also have a part in this. Then there's their genetics. So their genetics have a part to play. Then there is the weather. Maybe it rained that day. Maybe there was an accident on the road, and that's why the kid couldn't come to school. So if we are going to be completely honest, completely clear, and realistic, the fact is that there are many factors to blame. So saying that it's my fault is all well and good, and it's empowering, but it's not accurate. What I recommend is an active mindset instead. With an active mindset, what you do is instead you skip the blame phase altogether. Instead of saying, oh, it's my fault or it's the kid's fault, just say, what could I have done and what can I do now to make sure they don't come late? Focus on what you can do and skip the blame phase.
So right now, I know I asked you about discipline in your life, but you sort of touched on some stuff that I'm really fascinated by.
Okay, cool.
So I'll just step away from that line of thinking, and I wrote it down, so I'll ask you later about a practice in your life. So with extreme ownership, a worry that I have when I hear about that way of thinking is it makes me feel like discipline can be sort of like a wheat thresher. Like, you've got some people who go through and they come out and they're still good to go. But a lot of people, the chaff just come through and get crushed. And discipline essentially works to really make some people into leaders, and some people feel good, and other people feel like losers, if it's extreme ownership. Because some people just can't handle that. They can't handle being like, I caused the rain today. Or just kill them.
Well, maybe I'd interject a bit, sorry. I guess extreme ownership is not just about saying it's my fault. The next step is, what can I do? What could I have done? So those things coupled together is extreme ownership. So if a guy just blames himself for how fucked up his life is and stops there, he's not really practicing extreme ownership. You own it, and then you do something. What can I do now to make my life less fucked up?
And then, so you were also talking about an active mindset, where you skip the blame phase and you move right to the resolution phase and right to the proactive phase. And a problem that I see with that is that some people, it just, essentially, it can kill discipline, because you screw up and then you're like, oh, what can I do to fix this? And then things go well and you screw up again and you're like, what can I do to fix this? And then suddenly screwing up becomes part of the routine, and the discipline, fades away, and you actually just have a routine where it's like, I forgot the kids at school, now I have to rush there, and it's like, now every day you're forgetting this, or like every day your students are coming to class late, and now it's a routine. So it seems like there's a really tough balance between not beating yourself up so much that you give up and not cutting yourself slack or skipping the phase where you learn from your mistakes.
Yeah. It's always an interplay. So I never really tell people in this podcast what to do. I always try to just recommend possible ways of thinking, because one has to be fluid and use whatever method works. But I guess the key here with an active mindset is you're not blaming yourself or anyone actually, or anything, right? Because it's really hard it's a hard problem to assign the blame correctly is what I'm saying. If you're going to skip that phase and be active and have an active mindset, then what you're focusing on is what you could have done and what you can do now. A perfect example would be, for instance, let's say you're a parent and you're driving your kids to school, but maybe you keep forgetting them let's say you forgot them this time. If you have extreme ownership, which is actually, I really respect people who have this mindset. So a person with extreme ownership will say, it's all my fault. How could I have forgotten my kid? And then how could I have not forgotten them? And then that thinking would lead the guy to say, well, maybe I should have put a reminder on my refrigerator to tell me, remember to pick up the kid. Or maybe I should have made an alarm. And I should have had maybe my husband or my wife call me later to tell me, remind me to pick up the kid. There are steps I could have taken to make sure I don't forget my kid at school. And what am I going to do from now on? These are the steps I'm going to implement. That would be someone with extreme ownership. First of all, it's completely my fault. I'm not going to blame my son for not reminding me to pick him up. It's not his fault. It's completely my fault. And then what am I going to do? An active mindset will not talk about fault. We'll just say, okay, why did I forget my son? I forgot my son because I didn't put enough reminders. I could have put a reminder on the refrigerator. I could have asked my husband. And then, how am I going to make sure this doesn't happen again? Here are the steps I'm going to take. So, with this kind of mindset, you reduce the likelihood that you make the same mistake again. But you never have to tell or assign blame to anyone. Firstly, because blame is a hard thing to assign, if you're going to be realistic. And the other thing is it doesn't really help. Because ultimately, if you have an active mindset, you're getting the same results as someone who has extreme ownership, only that the extreme ownership person is blaming himself and in a sense being a little delusional, thinking that everything is his fault, when in reality it's not.
I think it would actually be really interesting to find out from an ER administrator or a senior doctor at an ER how they deal with losing patients. Because it's like, if you always let your doctors blame themselves, then they're going to have alcohol abuse problems, which are rampant in ERs, and they're going to just be really down on themselves. But if no one ever blames themselves or the process, then you'll lose a lot of patients. So I wondered how, it sounds like it would be a similar method where you use it constructively without letting it bring you down.
Yeah. If I had to envision it, I'd say, okay, fine. So you have a surgeon, and the surgeon made a mistake, and so a patient is in trouble. Let's say they screwed up procedure, and the patient is now spending longer in care than he should have. You're the chief surgeon. You could say, well, it's completely your fault that this happened. Or you could say, it's completely my fault that I did not supervise you enough to make sure that you don't screw up procedure. Or you could skip that altogether and say, look, why was the procedure screwed up in the first place? And say, okay, well, part of it was because I didn't supervise enough, and part of it was because you weren't sleeping enough. So what can we do next time to make sure this doesn't happen? Well, I'll supervise you more, and I'm going to make sure that you sleep for 8 hours before you come to the hospital. Something like that. So in this case, you're actually changing things. The hospital is becoming better. The surgeons are following the procedure better, but without having to deal with who screwed up the most. I have no trouble with negative emotions, but you want to use negative emotions when they're valuable. In this case, they don't seem to be. But that being said, there are situations where, let's say you decide you have an active mindset, you're not going to pass blame, you're just going to focus on what you could have done and what you can do. But you might be working in an organization where not everybody has an active mindset. You're part of a team, and let's say the team failed, and you're the team leader. And then you have a superior, and the superior is asking you to say whose fault it was. So in that case, you have an active mindset, but you're not going to tell the superior, oh yeah, it's nobody's fault. No, that's actually weak. Sign of bad leadership. In that case, then the best recommended option is extreme ownership. You're not going to point the finger at your people in your team and say, no, it was him. No. You say, I'm the leader, it's my fault. If you have to assign blame, like if you really are in love with blame or you have to, extreme ownership is the way to go. But in most cases where you don't have to, I suggest transcending the blame phase and just focus on how can I fix it.
And if people are interested in vignettes of urgent cares and ERs getting it right and wrong, they should read Atul Gawande's The Checklist Manifesto.
Oh, wow.
It's got a lot of cool vignettes of really bad situations in hospitals and how they can be handled well and how they can go wrong. So I've written these questions down so that we can sort of go off on tangents and I can remind you what the question is. But this is something I'm interested in. I know that you have several disciplined practices throughout the day, and one of those is studying mathematics, right? So what I want you to do is just briefly tell me what that looks like. Your disciplined practice of mathematics, Monday through Sunday. What does that look like? And then I've got 2 questions for you, which I'll ask you after you give an overview of what your practice looks like.
Right. So I'm a little hesitant to give my practice. Part of the reason is someone's going to listen to it and just copy it directly, which I don't encourage you to do because your situation is not the same as mine.
Yeah, don't do that. Christian he has his own way of doing things.
Yes. Ultimately, you have a brain, so you might as well use it to think up a system that works for you, as opposed to like taking someone's system and copying it directly. Might not work as well.
You don't have to share your system. You could just say, like, what does a disciplined practice look like? Choose any. Tell me what it looks like a little, and then I've got 2 questions about it.
All right. So actually, I'll do one better. I'll talk about the principles of a disciplined practice and how I apply those principles to a certain disciplined practice. But I won't go into the details of like, at 8 a.m. I do it. I'm not going to go into so many details because I want to leave the I want to leave the members of the community to think and come up with their own way of doing things. So, for instance, one thing that I do consistently is I have a belief system that if I say I'm going to do something, I have to do it. So that's a standard I've set for myself. If I tell you I'll be there at 8, I'll be there at 8. If I tell you by midnight I will have done this, I'll have to do it. So that's my standard. So if I say tomorrow at 8, 9 p.m., I'm going to study math, then once I put it on paper, it's out there. Now I have to do it. Because a belief system of mine, a standard of mine is, if I commit to something, I have to do it. So what are the principles behind this belief system? How am I able to sustain it? And the idea is clear here. What I do is, and I think this is, I guess, the core of how beliefs work. When you have something that is not complicated, for instance, doing what you said you're going to do is not a complicated thing. What's complicated is maybe the quality of the work. So, for instance, showing up at 8 a.m. to do math, that is something I can do. I don't need training for. But actually doing the math and doing it well, that is complicated. I need to learn how to do that. So a belief system like I need to show up at 8 is something I can do. Things that you can do are the sorts of things that are better to use as a belief system. So in this case, if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it is a belief system I have. And then I treat it just like the other belief systems. We actually all have belief systems in life. For instance, many men have the belief system, I never hit women. It's just a standard you have. You didn't have to practice. It's just something you never do. It's a line you never cross. It doesn't matter how much the girl insults you, you're just not going to hit her. It's who you are. So I try to leverage that same spirit when it comes to other disciplines I want to apply in my life. In this case, if I say I'm going to do it, I have to do it. I always do what I say I'm going to do. I treat this the same way you treat your belief that I never hit women. It's a standard that I don't cross. So if I say at 9 p.m. I'm going to do math, then exactly 9 p.m. I'm doing math. There is no universe in which it's 9:01 and I haven't started doing the math. Just to show you how maniacal I am about this. So recently I was talking to a girl in the house and she offered me some rice and I didn't really want to eat this rice. And as she was leaving, we're just making jokes and I told her, she was like, oh yeah, by the way, the offer is still open. If you want to eat the rice, I'll definitely offer it to you. Then I said, I'll take you up on that. Basically committing to eating the rice. I didn't want to eat it, but now I had made a commitment to eat the rice. And so suddenly I realized I have to be consistent because it's my standard. So what I had to do was, before I end up screwing up and not eating it, or the rice maybe gets eaten and now I can't meet my commitment, I now told her, okay, you know what? Actually, I'll eat the rice now. So I got the rice from her and I ate all of it because I had to stay consistent with my standard. And that's how you should treat, I think that's a core principle of how to treat disciplined, this is how you want to treat your disciplines. As the sort of thing that you don't compromise a bit. Because if you compromise, the compromise becomes the new standard. If you say, I always do what I said I'm going to do. If at any occasion you don't do it, you say something and you don't do it, well then it's no longer a standard. Now you have a new standard of compromising. And if you do this sort of thing with any sort of discipline you have, you don't need to copy mine of, I always do what I said I'm going to do. You could do something else. For instance, I never give up. Maybe for you, you realize you have a problem with quitting things. So you say, I never give up. This is who I am. And throughout the day, you set up situations where you get to keep this standard and reinforce this belief. Just like every time you don't hit a woman, you reinforce your belief of I am the guy that never hits women. In this case, you reinforce your belief of I never give up. So you say, okay, you're going to set up a situation where it's really difficult and you might be tempted to quit, but you don't quit. Whenever you do this, you reinforce the standard. And if you don't compromise even a bit, then it becomes the sort of thing that sticks. So that's, I guess, the best advice I'd give you. But disciplines, obviously, this principle doesn't work with things that are genuinely complex. So, for example, a bad belief to have is, I am an A student. The reason for that is that being an A student is genuinely complicated. If we give you a hard enough test, you're not going to get an A. It's something that's you can work on, but there are lots of factors out of your control. A good belief system would be, I always do my best on a test. That is something that's completely in your control. It's something you can do.
All right, so let me ask you, this is about what it looks like in your system when you don't meet your obligation. So let's say that you told yourself at 9 p.m. I'm going to be studying math. And whatever happens during the day, let's say you didn't get a good night's sleep the night before, and then you're so exhausted that you need to take a nap and you start sleeping at 5 and you wake up at 8:30 and you're starving because you haven't eaten all day. And so you're eating and suddenly it's 9:10, 9:20 and you have to clean your dishes. What does that look like? Because a lot of people, this week, I said I would wake up around 6 a.m. every day. I woke up at 6:30 yesterday and then like 7:20 today. So for some people, if they're not careful, it spirals out of control. I think that this is a problem for a lot of people. Kicking addiction is that spiral. So in your life, what does it look like? 9:20, you were supposed to study math at 9. What do you do from there?
Right. So sometimes you have a standard and things spiral out of your control and you're not able to meet the standard. Let's say you set the standard, I'm going to wake up at 8 a.m., right? That's your standard. But then, let's say you set your alarm wrong in the night and you wake up at 10 p.m. What do you do now? You've compromised your standard. Holy crap. This is why it's important to have a backup standard, a backup discipline. So in my case, I always do what I said I'm going to do. Every time I fall short, I'm the guy that always gets back on track. So you have a backup belief that pulls you back. So if you say, I never quit, it's who I am. And then one day things get really hard and you quit. It's not the time to now beat yourself up and just be like, I guess I'm just a quitter. No. If you have a backup belief like, I'm the guy who, when he quits, I actually get back to not quitting. Now so you fall back on that belief. It feels very mechanical, but it's amazing. The human brain actually functions with this kind of thinking works really well with the brain. Whatever you focus on expands in your brain. So if you focus on, I'm the guy that never quits, that's all that's really in your brain. Every time you do that, your brain just confirms that I never quit. It's actually going to forget situations where you quit. And that's what you really want. You want to just convince yourself and the inner critic that you're just not a quitter. But what if something happens and you actually end up quitting? Then you don't want to beat yourself up. Now you switch to the different belief system, the other backup belief. I am the guy who, when he quits, in a situation when most people would just continue quitting, I'm the tough guy that's able to put myself back on track and go to the original standard. Now you take pride in being able to pick yourself up and go back to the original standard. And obviously you don't want to compromise this belief of getting back on track. And from what I've noticed, I don't know if this is scientific, but usually what I've noticed is if you're consistently upholding a discipline and you fall short of it once, usually you're able to get back on track and keep going. I don't know, maybe it's the brain's way of figuring out that, look, we've always been consistent, we just screwed up this one time. I think there is such a mechanism in the brain. The only problem occurs when you keep breaking the standard. Then as far as your brain is concerned, this is not a standard anymore. Because, if let's say you were supposed to work every day for a week, and on Tuesday you didn't work, your brain might be like, okay, we screwed up this time, but now we're getting back on track. But let's say on Thursday you don't do the work, on Friday you don't do it, then suddenly now the standard is not doing the work. And so suddenly you end up not being disciplined and upholding the standard you had to have. So it's a little tricky, but it's powerful principles there. You set a standard, you say, under no circumstances am I going to compromise it. On the time when events spiral out of your control and you actually end up breaking the standard, you take pride in being the guy that gets back on track and goes back to the standard. Because most people are not able to do that. Most people, if they say I'm going to wake up at 8 and they wake up at 9, they suddenly beat themselves up and they stop waking up early at all. But you're going to be the guy that when he wakes up at 9 instead of at 8, gets back to waking up 8. Because you're a person of discipline. It's weird mental gymnastics, but surprisingly it works.
All right, so you were talking about having a practice such as saying that you were going to study math starting at 9 p.m. So I have a question for you. Let's say that someone, and I've heard other people speak to this, but let's say someone has everyone's got multiple disciplines in their life. Like you shower every so many days, but you also brush your teeth, hopefully, every day. So these are multiple disciplines in one's life. Let's say that you have a discipline where you say, I study math 2 hours every day. And you also have a discipline where you say, I get to bed at 10 p.m. every night, 10:30 p.m. every night, and I wake up early every day, and that makes me more productive. Now let's say you had a day that was really busy, and it is 9 p.m., and you need to study math for 2 hours, but you also need to get to bed at 10:30. how do you make that decision and not, because you made it a question of, are you good for your word? It's a matter of principles. So how can you not be a liar and still choose one of these?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So you're basically tackling the issue of what happens when your various disciplines interrupt each other. They kind of intersect and they are opposing each other. This makes sense. It can happen. The scenario you came up with does work here. It's like, I need to work for 2 hours, but at the same time, I need to sleep in an hour. When you're in those sorts of situations, there are probably going to be a couple of ways you're going to handle it. Part of it is you should have been organized to not have that happen. But if you have many disciplines that you engage in, it's possible that they intercept each other. For instance, so I was listening to Jocko Willink talk once. So for example, we have the fundamental principle that I don't hit women. Many men have this, right? He was saying that too. He has the belief that he never hits women. He's also a Navy SEAL. Another belief system he has is he needs to protect Americans. What if you have a woman holding a gun or a bomb and is threatening a bunch of people in a mall? Are you not gonna hit her in order to reserve your belief system that you don't hit women? Well, in that case, now you have a conflict. So these are one of the cases where you need to violate one of your principles. You need to decide which principle is more important and go with that. So in this case, then you rationalize it later by saying you still followed your principles. You just followed this principle. So you focus on the principle you followed. I protected Americans, not I hit the woman. Or I did the math for 2 hours, not, oh yeah, I went to bed an hour late. Or, but if you, in your list of priorities, the principle of sleeping is more important than doing math for 2 hours, then I guess in that case you're going to prioritize sleep over the math. And then prepare to make sure that you don't have your principles clashing with each other that way often.
So would you say that there's benefit in figuring out the ordering of your disciplines, or the ordering of, I guess your disciplines, so that when these conflicts do arise, you aren't spending 10 minutes getting worried and trying to figure out which one to pick? You just automatically know which one?
Yeah, well, I get the sense that people intrinsically know what's most important. We have a sense of priorities. Sometimes both things are really important. Let's say you have a career and one of your disciplines is like you want to do your absolute best at your career. But at the same time, you have a family. Let's say you just got married and you also want to be there for your wife. And that's another thing that's important to you. Now you have two competing disciplines. And in this case, it might be hard to say which one is the priority because all of them are so important to you. Then in those kinds of scenarios, I think you're right there, because in those kinds of scenarios, you want to decide before time which one is more important. If you decide family is more important, then in situations where family clashes with work, you pick family, and vice versa. Right. Because you don't want to find yourself in that situation and have to make the decision, because it might be mostly colored by emotion. But I think the more common scenarios is the two competing disciplines are one where you know which one is more important. So you have a paper due and you also have to sleep. Typically, you know which one is more important to you.
All right. So a little while ago, you and I were talking about some older people in our lives who we see who don't have certain traits that we already feel like we want to have. So as far as discipline, how much can you learn, or to what extent can you learn discipline later in life? So like, I'm 23 now. I know people who went to military college and served in the army for years, and they are extremely disciplined, and they had that beat into them. And I feel in many ways far less disciplined, but I'm wondering, to what extent can I get myself to an extremely disciplined place without having started at the age of 18, fresh out of high school, right into a military academy. Like, if I want really strict discipline in my life, can I implement that on my own? Do I need a coach?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't tell you that there's a time when it's too late to become disciplined. That's not true. Because if you look at things carefully, actually, if you think of discipline in terms of the definition we gave earlier, where we're talking about discipline is a standard that you uphold. If that's what discipline is, then actually everybody is disciplined at something. If you look carefully, you find the guy who's a couch potato. But even the couch potato has a line he's not willing to cross. Maybe the line is, I'm always nice to kids. I just don't mistreat children. See, he has his discipline too. He's not disciplined in general, but in this one thing is disciplined. So that tells you, and I'm pretty sure as an audience member too, and I mean, you also have certain lines. Everybody, I think, I'm gonna say most people have lines that they don't cross. And so if you're able to do that in one area, what's stopping you from doing it in another? I feel like the core is just figuring out the principles that work in these disciplines that you already have and applying those principles to pick up new disciplines. Some people are indeed lucky. For instance, someone is born in a family and ever since he's a kid, his father always told him, in this house we don't quit. This is not a family of quitters. So in this case, talking of external discipline, the father and the family unit has created a sort of standard that's very high. And now the kid, as a desire, out of the sheer need to fit into the family and be part of the community, is forced to uphold that standard. In that case, that kid is actually lucky because many people have to struggle later in life to learn not to give up. But this kid just started and the standard was put into him from childhood. So in reality, we all have these standards that were instilled in us in childhood. Maybe it wasn't giving up, but it was, I always take care of my family. I always protect my people. Or I never betray my friends. We all have these disciplines and standards that were instilled in us in birth. It's just that we happen not to have some of them. So the key is to learn how these standards, how you did these other disciplines, and then apply it to this situation. If you're the person who doesn't backstab your friends, part of it is just you establish it at some point that, look, I never betray my friends. And you never cross that line ever. Whenever it reached a point where you had to betray your friends, you didn't betray them. So it became who you are. Well, just do the same thing. I always eat cabbage at 5 p.m. or every dinner I eat vegetables. This is who I am. Just like I am not gonna betray my family, I'm also not going to go to bed without eating this cabbage. This is who I am. The principles apply and you can pick them up at any age. So there's no such thing as I'm too old to be disciplined. Those are just excuses.
So when you talk about discipline, and we've talked about this a lot, you and I, you always frame it as when you're describing a discipline, like let's say eating cabbage at 5, you always frame it in a certain way. You say, this is who I am. I am this person, which is really interesting and really powerful because that's not how everyone describes discipline. Often discipline is more so described as a force that's placed upon people. For you, it's a force within. It changes you. Do you find that that is a more powerful way to shape yourself, to rather than saying, like, I have a discipline that I do, to say, I am this person? I actually wrote it down on a piece of paper that's in here the other day. I wrote down, I am the person who wakes up early in the morning, because you and I had that conversation.
Yeah, honestly, this is a topic I've struggled with a lot, and I had to learn the hard way from the school of hard knocks. And I tried all sorts of variations of being disciplined. Some of them were like listening to motivational videos, where they keep talking about, oh yeah, I never give up, I never give up. All of those before sleeping, so I can sleep with the thought of not giving up. And then I'd wake up in the morning and affirm that I don't give up. But all those methods never seemed to work for me. And it turned out that the missing component was making it an identity, who I am, and treating it just like I treat any of my other disciplines that I already have in place. I never, when I have an exam, I don't have to doubt myself. I don't have to say, I'm not sure if I will cheat on this exam or not. I'm not struggling to not cheat because I've already internalized that part of who I am is the guy that doesn't cheat on exams. When you look at my exam paper, it's my own work and my own work only. It's not a conscious struggle because it's who I am. So it took a while for me to realize that this is exactly the way I should view any discipline that's really important to me. Naturally, you want to be careful about what you make your identity. For instance, some people turn certain political beliefs into their identities. I am a Democrat. This is actually dangerous sort of belief system to have. Because once you say I am a Democrat and you identify yourself as a Democrat, it becomes who you are. Which means when someone attacks your democratic ideas, it's not just an attack on the ideas, it's an attack on yourself. It actually feels like someone is physically attacking you. That's why you find people fighting violently, punching each other to protect themselves, to reaffirm who they are. So in this case, this is a belief system that's not, you want to be careful about the beliefs you hold. This belief system will hold you back. Like being an ideologue is not a good idea. Oh yeah, I am a feminist. This is me. I am a feminist. No, because then any idea that's not feminist is going to feel like a threat to you. Your mind is closed. Or I believe in communism. I'm a communist. This is who I am. Suddenly, any democratic idea you're not willing to listen to. And every democratic idea that someone brings up feels like an attack and a death of the self. So this is not as wise. You don't want to have those kinds of beliefs. But you see, those kind of situations show you how powerful belief is. If you're willing to fight someone just because they attacked a belief system you hold, how much are you going to be willing to fight for if you really identify as, look, I am the guy who, when he says he's going to do something, has to do it. This is who I am. This is my identity. Any sort of evidence any sort of situation that tries to attack this makes you double down on your resolve. When you're in a situation where people are testing you, oh yeah, you said you're going to do it. Are you really going to do it? In those situations, if this is really your belief, you double down even more. Kind of like an ideologue, but this time you have the right ideology in the sense that the ideology is helping you to achieve your goals, is helping you to maximize your potential, and ultimately to die empty.
Interesting. So I wrote down a note the other day for this conversation. I often think of discipline as the antithesis of fun. Discipline is something that reins in so in my mind, in many instances, I think of discipline as something that can rein in our more slovenly selves. So like, I want to sleep in. I want to eat an entire pizza. I want to do all these drugs and not go to class. And discipline keeps us from doing those things that might be really, really fun or cathartic. So my question is, can discipline itself be fun? Or is it always just a force that we place upon our lives that moderates other forces? Can it itself be like an enjoyable practice?
So I'm going to differentiate between fun and pleasurable pain. Two different concepts. So fun is usually temporary if you think about it. So let's say it's really in your best interest to wake up early and go to class. But you really have this overwhelming urge to sleep in. Sleeping in is fun. For the hours that you sleep in, great, you don't need to exert yourself in a classroom. You get to rest and get up whenever you want. But usually fun is temporary, and it could last not very long. Because when you wake up now not having gone to class, what follows next? Guilt, shame, low self-esteem, self-doubt. Because you say to yourself, look, if I can't even get up to go to a class, what will do I have to make anything change in my life? So it's a brief period of fun followed by tons of pain. And this shame could take you to all sorts of places. I was explaining you to before how it affects me really badly when I break from discipline. I feel completely worthless. I feel weak. I feel like I don't want to live. It's just a horrible place to be. And many people's sadness in the world can be traced down to that very idea. They feel like they have no control in their lives because someone is overweight and it's important to him to be healthy, but he ate an ice cream instead of eating vegetables, and now he had fun for 5 seconds, and then now he's in pain, feeling depressed, like how weak I am. I can't even control myself. I can't just overcome the urge to eat ice cream and eat healthy. Look at how fat I am. Look at what people think of me. I can't run, etc. So you see, it's just like when you're in the moment, the fun thing just expands in your brain. It seems like all that matters. But it's important for a man to be rational. This is fun, but it's going to be fun for a while. It's important to think about the pain and depression and the diminishing returns that come later. Now, there's the other part of the question, because you're asking me about whether discipline can be fun. I'm not going to use the word fun, because that's kind of temporary. Discipline is a sort of pleasurable pain. What I mean by that is, if let's say you, instead of sleeping in, you get up and actually go to class. Well, it's going to be painful to interrupt your sleep and go to class. But when you actually get to class and finish the class, there's a certain sense of pride that you have, that you are able to discipline yourself to make this happen. So you are in pain, but there is a pleasure that comes from the pain of pushing through and meeting your standard. And what follows next? High self-esteem. I'm the sort of person who can make things happen. I'm the sort of person who, even though no one is forcing me to wake up at 8, I wake up at 8 anyway. So really, if you think about it, discipline is not fun, but it's pleasurable. That feeling of, a good example is a guy I consider to be my mentor. I follow his podcast all the time. And I mean, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to unlocking your potential, I've never seen a better podcast than the Impact Theory with Tom Bilyeu. And there's one part he talks about that I really love. He says he once, I think he had some delicious meal in front of him, but he was not supposed to eat until like later in the night. So guess what he does? He moves his nose closer to the food and he inhales the great taste, and he takes pride in the fact that even though this food is so delicious, he is the sort of person that's not gonna eat it, because that's how much in control he is. So he's gonna smell it and it's gonna be desirable to him, but he's ultimately gonna conquer it and not eat it. So there's the pain of, God damn, like I'm hungry now and I can eat this. But there's the pleasure of overcoming the weakness of immediate gratification. So it's important to switch one's mindset. Discipline is actually pleasurable. The pain is pleasurable. And it actually eventually gives you freedom and more options and allows you to change more things. And readjust your view of fun. Fun is always temporary. Last a few seconds in the case of ice cream. Maybe a few hours if you're sleeping. But then what follows is horrible. So when you want to do the fun and easy thing, try to focus on the depression that will follow. that might discourage you from breaking your discipline.
So when you think the word discipline, I want you to tell me one person that comes to mind when you think of the word discipline, and tell me what discipline looks like in their life and why they are an exemplar of discipline.
I need to think about that. There are tons of disciplined people out there.
We can also...
Actually, forget that. Kobe Bryant. Perfect example.
Sure, I'm from Boston.
Yeah. I mean, you just go on YouTube and listen to anybody talk about Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant's work ethic is known to be, like, legendary. People would, like, show up to the gym and find Kobe Bryant in a sweat. And that's when they're coming to practice, he's already in a sweat. And then it'd be like the last guy to leave the gym, working late into the night. Just pushing day after day, not relenting. Like, I think there was sometimes when he had to make 500 baskets every day before going to bed. That's the sort of discipline I admire. Because that's the sort of person that is the definition of a relentless man. Sort of person that's dying empty. And that guy makes me feel like a complete loser. And I need to, like, update and actually become as hardworking as he is. Because that's really what we want. Someone who has these really high standards and upholds them. Because if you can do that, you become an extraordinary person. And if you're an extraordinary person, you're also going to do extraordinary things for the world. And you're going to die empty for sure.
Also, just to clarify, I'm not a basketball fan. I thought Kobe had played for the Celtics, but he spent his entire career
Lakers.
With the Lakers. So, if anyone finds that angering that I got that wrong, just remember how funny it is that I got that wrong.
And Jordan, of course. Legendary. Jesus Christ. Yeah.
But yeah, that is something to live up to be the person who has already put in all of the work that everyone else is going to put in for the day before everyone else has even started. You're pulling down double shifts.
That's right. And we respect people. Like, even if you find someone who you disagree with completely, but they're the sort of person who have standards that they uphold, there's a certain respect you give to them. Like, it happens all the time. You have someone you disagree with. You and Eve don't have the same political opinions, or you don't even have the same religion. But you notice the way this guy has certain firm convictions, and the way he sticks to them no matter what. That is just amazing. That's part of what makes a great leader. Because a great leader is someone who has standards, usually standards that are above everybody else, and he upholds them no matter what. And this is kind of what attracts us to them. Because they're doing something that most of us have a hard time doing.
So I'll share my let's say, dirty secret that a person who I really admire is Paul Ryan. He is so against what I believe in ideologically.
Wait, Paul Ryan is a politician?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's a congressman.
Ooh.
God, I hope he's not a senator, because if I got another thing wrong. But Paul Ryan, the reason that I really admire him, and I admired him when I was younger, is he's a politician. He's a very successful politician. He's young. He is smart as hell. He is he's known in Washington for being a super wonk of policy. So he reads all of the white papers. He makes sure that he is very well versed in all of the areas that he is advocating for or against. He's known to be a super healthcare wonk. And also the thing that I found really cool when I was 18 and I was a gym bum is that he is a workout fiend, and he'll wake up at like 5 a.m. and lead other congressmen on workout routines in the early morning before getting started on everything else going on. And right now he's pretty much like the unsung hero for conservatives, just trying to sort of like hold them together right now. So I just think he's a really impressive person. I don't agree with anything he says, but I admire his work ethic.
Right. You admire his discipline. There's something about it. That's right. And actually check any great leader we admire. That's one of the qualities that seems to be priceless. It's not the only one, but one of the most important. Nelson Mandela, sure. I believe in the freedom of my people so much, I'm going to spend 27 years in jail for it. Admirable. Martin Luther King, same thing. I'm going to do whatever it takes to liberate my people. I'm going to walk, you're going to threaten me, and I'm going to keep doing it. Amazing. Right. And that's why one of my favorite people that I really admire is a guy called Dr. Miles Monroe. He was a pastor, died a while back, but he's really influenced me a lot. And he talked about how a true leader is the sort of person that is not someone who finds something to live for, but someone who finds something to die for. Think about that for a second. Is if you have something and you're willing to die for it, that is the height of discipline. There is a standard that not even death will stop you from upholding that standard. This is intoxicating, and people will follow you to the end of the earth if you have that sort of conviction and standard and discipline that you're willing to die for. I'm not saying you should go to those lengths, but yes, just goes to show how important it is to be disciplined and to have standards that you'll never violate.
Well, man. So we worked our way from discipline up to being a true leader.
Oh, yes. It's all connected, by the way. Oh, that's an important thing to mention, right? Because if you're going to maximize all of your potential, if you're going to die empty and really transform society, by definition, you're going to become a leader too. When you're really good at something and you're really giving your all and using up all of your potential, people get inspired. And so whether you like it or not, they're going to begin to follow you. So actually, dying empty is, you can't tie it or pull it away from being a leader. Yeah, so that is something also, if you're going to be ambitious, then forget about, I'm not going to be a leader. That is non-negotiable, basically. If you're going to be relentless, if you're going to die empty, you're also going to be a leader. Get ready. Get used to it.
All right. Well, on that note, do you think we should wrap this one up?
Yeah, we should wrap this up. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much, Collin, for this episode. If you have any obstacles that you're facing right now, anything that's stopping you from dying empty, please email me that problem or set of problems that you're facing. My email is actually in the episode description. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening. Bye.
Thank you so much, Christian, for having me on, and thank you, everyone, for listening. All right.
See you later, guys.